Winchester. He had a number of daughters he needed to marry off to princes of the royal blood around Europe, and so he had a tournament here. But in those days, tables usually were set up, just trestle tables were set up for big banquets, and there was always a question of precedence, who sat at the end of the table. And of course, if you weren't an important person, you would sit below the salt, because there was a big salt cellar, a big ornamental gold salt cellar in some sort of design, and you'd sit below the salt if you were one of the staff, but if you were important, you sit above it. But then the order of precedence was always difficult to work out, so he decided, having heard this story that had been passed by word of mouth about King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, there had been a manuscript written of it, he then decided, well, we'd have a round table built. So he commissioned a round table. It was here in the hall, and then when Henry VII came to Winchester in 1485, having won the Battle of Bosworth and killed Richard III, Henry had a fairly slender claim to the throne. Let's say he was born on the distal side, I think we would call it, of the royal line, but he did combine the houses of Lancaster and York. And what you see painted on there are the roses of the red rose of York, the red rose of Lancashire, and the white rose of York. But the table itself wasn't painted until later. But the story about Henry is interesting. Henry VII, his first son was born here in Winchester in 1485, and he christened him Arthur. And that was a nice bit of political spin, I think, in those days, because he was keen to establish the line of the Tudor line back to the story of Arthur. And who Arthur was, well, nobody's quite sure, but certainly if you look back into the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, the first history of England, he talks about being a king around 500, 600 AD, and if you're familiar with Glastonbury and Tintagel and all these places where was Camelot and so forth. But the story